I think Secretary Carter really pointed to one of the key issues that the Defense Department's facing right now, but also the key reason he's out there. And that's that there are real problems right now between the relationship in Silicon Valley and Washington in general, but also the Pentagon. I thought there were two kind of key components the Secretary was pointing to that really underscore why he's there. One is just macro-level technology. Right now, the Defense Department feels like it's not at the top of its game, which, frankly, in the past, it worked very closely with contractors, with people on the technology side inventing things like the Internet, and they feel like they've fallen behind there. And I think part of the reason is they believe out in Silicon Valley there's this view that the Pentagon is a slow, hulking bureaucracy. It's not a place for innovation or innovators. And I think that's why you see Ash Carter heading out there. The other big issue, and I've heard this across the government, but especially in the Pentagon, is the people. You heard him talk about the need when you make new investments to bulk up cybersecurity, but also the need as you're trying to bolster technology. You need the people that can do this. The place where those people are, Silicon Valley. Those people in Silicon Valley, very skeptical of what the U.S. government is and what it's become, particularly in the wake of the Edward Snowden revelations. Ash Carter's goal, while he's out there, is to try and build that bridge, repair some relations, and perhaps get some of those people to come back and help the Pentagon advance, guys.
But, Phil, when you talk about repairing the relations, repairing the damage, not just from what happened with Edward Snowden, but as you mentioned, this seeming behemoth of the Defense Department of the Pentagon, what's the enticement? What is the hook to get people to want to go to work for the Department of Defense?
It starts with, so there's the most basic one you could think of, and he talked about it early on in the interview with Emily, and that was you incentivize them with money, with public-private partnerships, with investments. Now, that's always been one of the techniques that the U.S. government has used just in general to work with the private sector. But the other thing, and I think this is where Ash Carter thinks he's different than maybe some of his predecessors, he believes he's an innovator. He's a physicist. He's worked out in Silicon Valley. He speaks the language. He believes he personally can appeal to people that the Pentagon, well, sure, the bureaucracy is never going to go away. The multiple layers inside the Pentagon are never going to go away. He is willing to get behind and personally invest in people that are trying to break out, do things differently, and do things to have an immediate impact on what the Pentagon's doing when it comes to technology going forward. So I think there's kind of the broad-based push that the U.S. government's always there with incentives and public-private programs, but there's also the personal push that I think Ash Carter, when you talk to his people, believes he can convey when he's out there personally.
Phil, I'm wondering if this is really directed at the management of these technology companies as much as it is directed at the industry itself, in as much as, you know, Google, Facebook, Apple, they're providers of consumer devices. They don't necessarily make software for the military. They've already got billion-dollar contracts to make that happen.
Yeah, I think one of the questions, and this is actually another kind of interesting side aspect of all of this, there's a feeling when you talk to folks that are affiliated with the technology industry that are inside the Beltway, that the Pentagon is entirely reliant on defense contractors. All the defense contractors are in this area, and they are all just as hulking and slow and as much kind of a part of the system as the Pentagon is itself. And because of that, people in Silicon Valley, people in the tech industry kind of shy away from that. They don't want to become a part of that system, become a part of that group of people. And so I think what you see, Pimm, you make a good point. I think what Ash Carter wants to do more than anything else, besides talking broadly to the industry, is actually have face-to-face meetings with the people out there at the top of these organizations and try and see, not necessarily to bring them on board to be a Boeing or a Northrop Grumman or somebody like that with those types of relationships, but try and get them to be willing to invest themselves in what the Pentagon's trying to offer, in what the U.S. government's trying to do. It's a tough bridge to cross. It's a long road for Ash Carter to try and get there, especially with some of the lack of trust right now. But I do think, Pimm, to your point, those are the people that Ash Carter recognizes he needs to speak to and that he needs to connect with in order for this relationship to work.
Well, speaking of connecting, Phil, Secretary Carter was just telling our colleague Emily Chang, you know, he was out there before he went back to the Department of Defense. Are those relationships, as far as you know, still solid? Can Ashton Carter say, I really need to talk to you? This is not so much about me and you and about Silicon Valley, but it's about national security. And when your nation says they need your help, they'd like your help.
I think it helps the process, Mark, and the reason I say that is because national security officials in Washington across the board are having a difficult time communicating with CEOs and top executives in Silicon Valley. This goes on a number of different levels over the last year and a half, 2 years, and one of the primary reasons, and Secretary Carter noted this directly, is in the wake of the Snowden revelations, it wasn't just trust issues and concern about Washington. This was a direct impact on the bottom line of a lot of these companies internationally, and so that's been kind of at the crux of the split. And I think more than any other national security official currently in the U.S. government, Ashton Carter can pick up the phone or can walk into a meeting and say, look, not only do I speak the language, but we've known each other before. He wasn't necessarily at the core of this group of national security officials when the Snowden revelations were coming out. And so I think he's got a little bit more, again, the trust is an issue no matter who the national security official is, but I think the sense, at least among Obama administration officials, is that Ash Carter might be the best liaison they've got to the community because of his past experience and because of the way he can speak to Silicon Valley.
Okay, Phil, but let's take a different tack then. If you're talking about Silicon Valley, where you're talking about a lot of young, brilliant people who are working for some of these companies out there, and given the Snowden revelations, because we've hit on that a couple of times before, is it a possibility that Secretary Carter may just run into some folks who say, we know what happened with Snowden, we believe Edward Snowden, and we are not going to help you spy on our own people? Do you think that Secretary Carter might run into some of that?
I don't think it's a possibility. I think it's a guarantee. And I don't think it's just among kind of rank and file employees out there. I think that there are high-level executives at all of these companies who believe that. Look, one of the biggest things that's happening behind the scenes in Washington right now is a fight over technology, over encryption technology related to some of the operating systems from Apple and Google. National security officials are working behind the scenes as much as they possibly can to try and find almost a back door through some of the encryption technology. And the top officials at these companies refuse to let them do it and won't even really come to the table. It's getting to the point right now, I think, guys, that you'll see in the next months, a couple months, this is going to spill out into the open. So, Mark, not only is it probable that will happen, I guarantee it will happen. And again, that's another one of those issues, probably the primary issue that Ashton Carter has, to be able to build any bridges, to be able to get people to believe that the investments are for real and they're for good, which I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley care deeply about. He's got a long road to walk.